I know we're the last talk before lunch, but hopefully no one's too hangry. You guys have your trail mix, your
Should have
snacks.
brought Snickers to like.
That's true. That would have been a good start.
Am I on?
No.
And so just an FYI, before we get started, we want this to be accessible to everyone. So we are going to announce the slide numbers as we go through in case anyone's following on their own device at home. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll begin with this bold claim. If you can polyfill for Internet Explorer, you can optimize for a screen reader. So first, a little bit about us. Slide 2.
So my name is Kim Borowicz, and I'm a disability rights advocate. I am a person with a disability. I have a pretty profound vision impairment. I don't know if you can really tell from the picture on the slide, but I do use magnification software on my computer. I need to use large print to read anything that's printed out. I have to use magnifiers. My vision is so low that I'm unable to drive a car, just to kind of give you a sense of where my vision is at. So not completely blind, but low vision. So I do use assistive software every day, both at work and at home, to enlarge the computer screen. And I went to law school specifically to do disability rights work. So while I'm not necessarily a tech guru, I do exist in the disability space and have done legal work in that space for the last 10 years.
Thanks. And slide 3. I'm Meg Viar. I'm a software engineer working here in DC at Panoply Media. And in my prior work as a public school teacher, I designed blended learning curriculum for a diverse youth audience. And in that work, I saw that the same sorts of exclusionary design we often see in the analog world were mirrored in the digital landscape. And I wondered how the designers of educational software failed to consider the needs of students with disabilities, who make up almost 14% of the public school population. And now that I'm a software engineer, I have to ask myself the same kinds of questions. How can I develop products for a diverse user base if I don't know how users with disabilities interact with those products? So we're here today as technology professionals, and as technology professionals, we act as gatekeepers. And the way that we design, build, test, and maintain our software will either open or close the door on our users. So we're here to push ourselves to center accessibility throughout the DevOps process and beyond, and to motivate and equip ourselves to do better by our users. So first, we need to acknowledge that a lot of our software is broken. And then we need to identify how to fix it and how to make sure that future development doesn't need fixing. Slide 5.
So to get started, we're looking at how people with disabilities navigate and interact with websites and software. So I want to give a couple of examples of what we're talking about when we talk about assistive technology, assistive software. So like I talked about before, I use magnification software. It's an add-on software for Windows. It does have, I think it's a few $100 price point. So I'm not using the magnification that's built into Windows. It just doesn't provide enough usability for me. Another type of assistive technology people will use is inverted text. So you actually saw a good example of it on the last slide, where it's the white text on a black background. So some people with vision impairments would need that inverted text. And we do find that certain websites, certain databases, because of the coloration, because of icons, won't completely invert like that. You'll get a lot of grayed out space that the person isn't able to see. Another way that people with disabilities navigate websites is by using speech software. So that could be something like Dragon Dictation is kind of the most popular one on the market. And so a lot of people will use that kind of software just in general, like people without disabilities, to type a long Microsoft Word document. But some people with disabilities who have disabilities that affect their hands or their arms, so they're not able to type or use a mouse, can use the microphone to navigate through a website. And we'll show an example of that, but they use voice cues to click on different parts of a website. The other way that people with disabilities use assistive software is called screen reading software. So if you've ever heard of the acronym JAWS, That stands for Job Access with Speech. It's another piece of add-on software that can be used that reads out loud what's on the computer screen to the person who's blind if the website is set up in a way that is accessible to it. And that's another add-on software that can be added to the computer so it can read out loud to the person who's blind. Now, the person who's also using that readout function, who's blind, also cannot use the mouse because the mouse clearly involves finding the arrow on the computer screen, which they cannot visually do. So we're thinking about, too, like navigating a website without using a mouse, using keystrokes and tabbing. So I wanted to make a quick distinction here. So there's like the assistive software side that I talked about, which is screen readers and things. And then what we're mainly focusing on is the actual accessibility of the website. So I want to give you guys kind of a visual of what I'm talking about. So you don't have to answer out loud, because I know this is hard to get us doing that. But how can someone who uses a wheelchair access the stage that her and I are standing on right now? No, right? A ramp is missing. There's no ramp. So if we can think of the wheelchair as the assistive software, the screen reader, right? And we can think of the stairs as the potentially inaccessible coding, I just want you to kind of wrap your minds around that. That kind of physical accessibility and how it kind of fits into what we're talking about with websites or databases. Next slide.
All right, slide 6. So we'll be structuring our goals today into an easy to remember acronym, the 4 A's, or our software is broken. We should fix it. Slide 8.
I told you it was a good joke.
She did.
We were dividing up the slides and back and forth, and
She's
I
like,
got
"You
to
can
that one.
take
I was
the
like, you
joke."
get to have the
Yeah.
joke. So awareness. So that's what we're doing today. We're just trying to raise awareness. We hope that you can go out to where you work and raise awareness about this topic, and just really put together that this affects real people. So while you might be sitting at the computer doing all this coding and on the back end, just really thinking about, there are people who are blind, there are people with disabilities out there who really not just benefit from this, but like it makes it so that they can actually access what you have, right? So it's like the stage. If you can't get on the stage, you can't get on the stage. If you can't use the screen reader on the website, you can't access the website, period. You're just not using that space at all. So raising awareness. The next slide, slide 10.
Slide
is
9.
Oh, sorry, slide 9.
So next we have action. And we'll be providing an overview of some best practices and some easy wins that you can use to start making your software more accessible right away. And we're also going to talk about how to integrate those concepts into your existing DevOps workflows. Slide 10.
Assessment. So this can be automated or manual testing on the coding side. It could also be testing with actually using the screen reader to try to navigate the website. And we'll go through that a little more later.
And slide 11, our final A is for advocacy. So you can think of this presentation like a CPR or first aid training. So once you're made aware, you're responsible for applying these techniques when you see the need and have the power to do so. So we can't teach you how to make your software accessible in 30 minutes, but we can try to prepare you to go back to your place of work, armed with some resources and ready to act as an advocate for all users, and to be a voice for those that aren't currently served by our software. So with these goals in mind, and listen for those A's as we go through, we'll get started. Slide 12.
So the primary resources we're going to go through are the Department of Justice Software Accessibility Checklist. So we'll have slides that go through the different items on that checklist. And also the W3C, which stands for World Wide Web Consortium, the Accessibility Guidelines. And those guidelines are called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG, if you've heard of that acronym. So those are kind of what we're basing what we're going to talk through today.
And slide 13. So according to Tim Berners-Lee, a director at the W3C and a founder of the World Wide Web, the power of the web is in its universality. So access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. Slide 14.
Quote, access to information and communications technology is a basic human right. This is part of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Next slide. So slide 15, I'm going to talk about the state of the law in this area of website and software accessibility. So who does it apply to, and what guidelines are legally binding in what space? So next slide, slide 16. I'm going to talk about the laws for website accessibility in federal government, in education, and for private entities like grocery store websites or retailer websites. Next slide. Federal government websites must be accessible. So this is the clearest rule we're going to get as we go through this. Very bright line rule. This is both internal and external. So it's both the .gov website that the public interacts with, and it's if there's like an intranet or internal software programs and websites that are used by federal employees, it covers that as well. It also covers like what's being put on the website. So say like the PowerPoint gets thrown up on the website. So that's an additional layer of accessibility going through, are the slides accessible? Do they have alt text kinds of things? So for federal government, it has to be accessible. If you've ever heard the term Section 508, I know sometimes people don't break that out, but that's a section of the Rehabilitation Act. And that was passed in 1998. Next slide. So when we start to get into education, it starts to get a lot murkier. So you don't have this clear line rule like you do for federal government. So you're using a different section of the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, which this is covering public schools because that's a state and local government part. So I tend to think of this as trying to fit a round peg in a square hole. So you see the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. This is really such a landmark law for people with disabilities rights. Well, the internet did not exist then. It clearly didn't exist in the way, it couldn't have been imagined, especially by Congress, imagined in the way that we're, and any Congress, I'm not pointing at specific. It just couldn't be imagined as the way it's being used now. So what I see happening in the current legal landscape is we're trying to like put our claws into different parts of the Americans with Disabilities Act that apply to other things to like make them apply to the internet. So that's why I pulled out this effective communication part. So originally, the focus of that was providing sign language interpreters, providing Braille. And so now court cases and people who are arguing for e-learning accessibility are pulling in that effective communication argument into it. Next slide. Okay, private entities is incredibly murky. Again, we're working with the Americans with Disabilities Act that was passed in 1990. Courts get really stuck on whether there's a physical entity that's attached to the website. So there's no clear rule here. Different parts of the country, different courts rule different ways on this, but a lot of them, like, is there a physical grocery store attached to the grocery store's website? Is there a physical place of public accommodation? Because again, this law was passed in 1990, so they were thinking about the ramp, right? So back in 1990, they said, gotta have a ramp, the ramp's gotta be a certain steepness to be legal. But they were not thinking about the internet and the coding. They were only thinking about physical space as opposed to the internet. Next slide.
All right, so before we dive into some of the specifics of the DOJ checklist, let's set the context for how we're going to apply these concepts within our own DevOps workflows. So it's easy to find resources online on how to make your software more accessible, but actually prioritizing it in our workflows is the true challenge. It's kind of like getting into shape, where you can look online and find what you should be eating, the exercises you should be doing, but actually doing it is another matter. So we want to be changing our mindsets and developing some routines to make sure that accessibility is salient from conception to deployment and beyond. So we're going to focus on a few key DevOps initiatives here, specifically plan, create, verify, and monitor. And slide 21. So decision-making about your software begins with planning initiatives, which probably include your product and design teams. So planning is the perfect time to advocate, it's one of our A's, for the business case for accessibility. Because not only does it potentially expand your user base, you're also going to be overlapping with other best practices, such as mobile design or device independence. Slide 22.
So how are users interacting with the software? So Meg and I talked about when we were planning this that developers will take into account different types of mobile devices, different types of web browsers that may be being used, but let's also bring into that that a screen reader may be being used or that magnification software may be being used within that. Next slide. So now we're going to show a demo of a screen reader.
Page. Handbook graphic. Link graphic programming A-Z. Link graphic photo of a teacher and student's hands feeling clay. Graphic step dash by dash step through the entire process. This page link graphic accessibility tools training. This page link graphic photo of hands exploring the tactile drawing of Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, 1907.
Have any of you ever run your software through a screen reader? Seeing a smattering of hands.
Page. Handbook graphic.
All right, slide 24.
And of course, when it's the screen reader's going through that, the only way for it to describe that picture is to have that alt text typed in. Otherwise, it just goes image, image, image. Well, okay.
Very helpful. Yeah.
It's only minorly annoying. So within the user stories, we really advocate inclusive hiring, that there are people with disabilities on the team, that there are people with disabilities involved in the project, and we're really all responsible for getting these diverse perspectives. The WC3 consortium, and we do have the resource at the end of the slides that people can get to the website, does include a lot of user stories for people with disabilities, a lot of demos of assistive technology, and a lot of the design personas that include people with disabilities. So that's a really great resource as well.
All right, slide 25. If you design something with intent, it won't need to be adapted. That's a great quote from Liz Jackson, who's the founder of Disabled List. So I found that most accessibility best practices we came across fit into three main objectives. So one is decoupling structure from content. The second is logical organization. And the third is multimodal representation. So during the design and planning phase, consider these objectives. Does your design include multiple representations of media and interactions? If you provide data visualizations, is there a way to get that information as just plain text? And is the flow of the page logical to make sure that a screen reader will actually read the content in the correct order?
And not skip a bunch of fields.
Yeah, exactly, right. Read all of the content and also in the correct order. So with an awareness of these objectives and the way that users will interact with our products, we're well on our way to start asking the kinds of questions we need to ask to make sure that accessibility is centered in our process. Slide 27. So once we have a working understanding of the design and functionality of our product from the planning phase, accessibility should continue to play a key role as we move into the creation of our products. So your definition of done for each development task should encompass accessibility concerns. After all, if we built a UI feature and it just didn't work on mobile, would we consider it done? And if not, why would we consider the same feature done if it was totally inaccessible to a screen reader or potentially to someone using voice commands? So if our planning processes are centered around user stories and our tasks are based on those user stories as well, let's make sure that we're integrating the stories of all users, including those with disabilities. Slide 29. So during the create phase, we want to take logical, well-structured designs and turn those into logical, well-structured applications. So generally speaking, our three main objectives, and I'm going to repeat them again because I'm a former teacher and I love repetition: decoupling structure and content, logical organization, and multimodal representation. These are also cornerstones of good programming, and they make our code easier to read and maintain. So I think we would all agree that code that generates a well-structured DOM is a win for devs. And a lot of assistive technology also relies on the DOM to indicate how the user should interact with your software. So everyone wins in that case. Slide 30. So automated and manual accessibility testing shouldn't be left for the end of our DevOps process. This should actually begin in the create phase, with developers utilizing digital tools to help make sure that their work will meet these accessibility-minded definitions of what is done. So this could include things like screen magnification and color inversion browser extensions that anyone can just add on their own. So the W3C's accessibility guidelines are still our gold standard for assessment. And according to Renu Rajani, the best automated tools out there may only verify up to a quarter of those guidelines checkpoints. And the results still have to be assessed manually. So as a goal for us as development teams, a reasonable goal might be 10% of automated testing for those checkpoints. And really, that's just going to include the things that are completely objective, like does this image have alt text or not? It doesn't necessarily tell you if that alt text is meaningful, right? So if our development teams use PR templates, this is another place to make sure that this is centered, and you can include that testing in your PR template checklists. All right, slide 31. By integrating accessibility concerns into our user stories and into our definitions of done and our testing practices, our teams are going to be ready to pass on products to the verify stage, where we can have a more formal assessment of the accessibility of our work. Slide 32.
So does our software work? Have we gone through the guidelines to check both manually and automated checks if it works? I also recommend, in addition to those automated and manual checks conforming to the guidelines and the checklist, to also run a screen reader or like especially a screen reader over it to just make sure it's actually working. So yeah, just not sticking with that coding testing, but also in the quality assessment phase, running a screen reader over it, making sure it works by tabbing, making sure it can be done, hands behind your back, no mouse, that you can navigate through the website. Next slide.
All right, so we're running a little short on time, so I'll try to put some hustle in here. So we're moving into the monitor phase. So after our products are released, we want to continue to monitor their performance. So during this phase, we're going to consider the end user perspective and experience. And obviously, accessibility should remain centered throughout. Slide 34.
So seek feedback. So how do users with disabilities actually experience that software? Including users with disabilities in the feedback. Please, and this is kind of for the federal government people, please don't use employees that use assistive technology as the user tester people. It's not their job, unless it's their job. I cannot tell you the number of requests. I mean, if their job's to be a lawyer, they're a lawyer who happens to use a screen reader. If they're an investigator, they happen to use Dragon. And I will say I am not a great tester because I don't know what I can't see, okay? So I have been caught many times where people are like, oh, none of these links are showing up properly. Well, I can't see them at all. So like part of my disability is I'm colorblind. So if there's a color contrast problem where the color of the text looks the same as the background, I can't even tell that there's words there to write on a test sheet to say color contrast is bad because it's so bad that I can't even tell it's there. So that's just a case for like, I'm not a great tester, don't make users be the testers. And a lot of user feedback that I've heard is just like, it doesn't work. right? And so then it's hard to break down, well, what about it is not working from a tech perspective?
And the W3C actually has a lot of resources around how to be inclusive in QA without doing exactly what Kim just said. All right, so we're moving into our speed round. We've got 5 minutes left. I think we can cover this all in 5 minutes. So we're going to go through the DOJ checklist. We're going to give you a quick overview of each item. We're going to see an example of it in action or potentially in inaction. And we're going to give you just some quick easy wins and some common pitfalls that you're going to want to avoid. And as we're going through, look for our 3 objectives. I won't read them again, but I do hope that you will remember these 3 going home. All right.
So
let's kick
this
it off.
first is a video of keyboard access. So we're just going to play this to watch how it moves through the tabs. So this is an important thing to think about in any kind of form scenario. So that would be like a database, or if there's like a survey that needs to fill out, anything where someone is both needing to get information from the page and also enter information.
All right, slide 38.
So watch out for drag and drops, pull down menus, and draggable elements, especially her and I were talking about like if a volume changer is a dragging element or a dragging element to proceed a video forward. Easy win, include defined focal points, a well-structured DOM, and a logical tabbing order that doesn't skip fields.
Yep. All right, so timing. Is our software free of timed tasks that cannot be modified by the user who may need additional time? So here we can see an example of a ticket website, and up here in the corner you can see that a timer starts when you put the ticket in your cart, and you have to fill the form out before the timer runs out or you lose your ticket. And there's no way to request more time. So things we want to watch out for, timed shopping carts or potentially timed online quizzes. And an easy win here is to allow for time extensions. So in that example, maybe you have an accessible CAPTCHA that pops up so that you can request more time while confirming that you are indeed not a robot. And slide 41.
So this next one is a video of someone using Dragon Dictation to navigate a website. So this is using a microphone to move around the website. It is a little hard to see.
Yeah.
But we just wanted to do an example.
And it's a bit of a blooper reel. You will hear myself and Kim in the background as we navigate some tricky points here with our user. Is it playing?
The audio's not.
Oh, I think we lost audio on, oh,
Email,
there we go.
phone, submit, open in JS Fiddle, open, choose 2. Always allow. I can't, since it's IE and it's my stuff and all this stuff.
So it's hard to see, but a pop-up
This
from
thing
Internet
is
Explorer
over
popped up.
the,
Oh, you can move it if you drag it.
oh,
If you use your mouse.
Oh, yeah.
And then I ignorantly say, you can move it if you drag it. And
Okay.
Kim says, if you
Start
have a
over.
mouse. And we only had a mouse out so that I could set up the screen capture.
open in JS
Yeah.
Fiddle,
So for time, we can go ahead and
Yeah.
skip on
Open.
to slide 42. There we go.
So watch out for elements with the same name but different functions, and position description labels to the left or above controls. Next slide.
All right, so slide 43, icons. So are icons used consistently throughout our applications? And are they also represented as text? So icons can help clarify meaning and can actually make your website more accessible for people with cognitive disabilities or those who speak a language other than the one used on your software. But over-reliance on icons, especially if there's no other representation as text, can also make your software less accessible. So things you want to watch out for, unlabeled icons, or icons where the label is actually part of the image and wouldn't be read by a screen reader. So an easy win here, multimodality, just provide a text version of the icon as well. Slide 45.
So this next example is sounds and captioning. So this is for folks who have a hearing impairment. So including captions on videos. Sorry, next slide. And having audio elements that have a visual method, visual representation.
And I know we're short on time here. We've only got a couple left. So display is the next one. So this is a broad category, but it talks about whether or not there are patterned backgrounds that might distract from the text, or whether or not the user can override default fonts and that sort of thing. So here we can see that a social media website requires you to complete a visual CAPTCHA to delete your account. But there's no alternative CAPTCHA for someone who may be using a screen reader. So
you can never delete.
So you can never delete your account. Thanks. Nameless social media site. I'll let you guess which one that is. So with display, you want to watch out for visual CAPTCHAs and also for meme style images. So we all love our memes, but we want to make sure that we actually have that text decoupled and a description of the image as well. And the easy wins here. Again, decoupling structure and content, decouple visuals from text, provide plain text, and don't just use color to convey information. So if you think on GitHub where you see the red and the green differentiating your diff, they have a little, it's not great, but a tiny plus and minus sign so that if you can't see the green and the red, you know that you're adding and removing
Yeah, I do
those
have to say as a
sections.
colorblind person, I hate those shift controls. I think they turn from red to green, like yes or no. I never know if I'm saying yes or no. I've missed out on some promotional items when I'm ordering things. And I get bummed because they're not in the box because I can't tell if it's red or
Swag
green.
efficient.
The next video shows a website that scales to size with magnification.
This was my favorite website when I was 12. Thank you, Melissa Kaplan.
So for this one, sorry.
There you go. Slide
For
50.
this one, watch out for fixed-sized elements and use M units.
Yeah, since M units are based on font size, as the font is scaled up and down, your other elements will scale as well. All right, we're almost done here. Second to last, we have documentation. So are all of your manuals and documentation available in electronic formats and as plain text? So here we can see a chart that would be accessible to some but not all users. And the same chart in a couple different modes. So we can see a long text description that's written out as prose to explain what that chart depicts. And we also see an example of a text-based table that could be exported to a CSV that's accessible. So some easy wins here. Just make sure that you provide multimodal representations of your data and avoid inaccessible formats. PDF is often one of the least accessible formats. So if you're not confident in the way that you're generating those PDFs, try to use plain text instead. And final slide here with training.
Is it 54 call to action?
We're almost there. So with training, this is one that doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, but you want to make sure that there's a chance for people with disabilities to be trained on your software if needed. And for sort of public companies that maybe don't have that sort of level of training for their users, you can think about your support teams, right? So making sure your support team knows how to support users with disabilities if they come to you with questions or concerns. Now we're 54.
So we end with a call to action. Go forth. Increase your awareness and increase the awareness of others. Advocate for accessibility in your DevOps practices. Take action throughout your workflow. Please don't leave accessibility till the week before the deliverable is due. Please do it. Please, please do it throughout. Assess your efforts. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Remember, we are the technological gatekeepers. Let's keep this door open so all users have the accessibility. So, our first two goals here, increase your awareness, advocate for your team.
And taking action and assessing our efforts, yep. So 4 A's, if you remember that in our 3 objectives, it's a good start. If you have questions, you can reach out to us. We are not the most social media active folks. I actually made a Twitter for this conference. So it's pretty bare if you want to christen it. I'm at Meg Baier.
She was kind of like, I don't know how to do this.
Kim is right here if you want to reach out to her. You can at her verbally.
Please reach out to me in the most inaccessible app way possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.